Folks, this is Tom Opre, your host to the podcast where we ask the tough questions regarding man's impact on the world's wildlife. Raw and unfiltered, we strive to help you fully understand the real issues at hand. Our goal, ensuring the world's wildlife and wildlife habitat exists forever. Stay tuned for another edition of Shepherds of the Wild.
So, where are we? Kind of explain this land to me and what it means to you as far as your family and all that goes.
Okay, so we're here at the confluence of Square Creek and Timber Creek. This ranch was established by my great-grandparents, who were later joined by my great-great-grandmother, also a great-great-uncle who helped them for a while. He'd been had a childhood or teenage disease that damaged his brain. So he actually did homestead here like the rest of the family, but the government in its wisdom decided that he was not mentally capable and couldn't own land. So his homestead was not proved up. It was up north of us here.
Okay.
And my family has been here ever since. My grandfather, then my mother and her two siblings were raised here. And when I finished up grad school, I moved back here. My grandfather just passed away, and so I raised my two children out here.
Okay. You're obviously, you've got a PhD. Yeah, it seems like, looking at your stuff that you're well versed in science. Why do you have an interest in science? What created that interest? And can you give me some background? I'm just curious, did it have anything to do with this place?
So when I was growing up, my dad was a wildlife biologist. He had a master's in wildlife biology and worked for the state of Montana. My mom was a veterinarian. And we moved around a lot because the governments in their wisdom feel that people should not stay in any one place too long, usually put down roots, that they're likely to be corrupted by that. And so thanks to that, we moved around, but my grandfather was always out here on the place. And so when work needed to be done, a lot of times we would dive into the pickup at, before dawn and drive out here and help out and spend 2 or 3 or 4 days or a week helping out with some of the major work and then head back home. So in some ways, even though I wasn't here very much, this was sort of the one constant kind of a base in my life. And of course, Mom had grown up here. When we first started coming out, there was still the log cabin that Mom had grown up in, and I was fairly old, heading toward high school probably when they took the log cabin down. So yeah, I remember that pretty well. And then about the time I started high school, I went to Montana Range Days and Montana Range Camp. And that just really ignited a fascination for animals, prairie ecosystems, wildlife, animal-plant interactions, just all of that web of existence. And it was just something that was fascinating to me and something that I was really good at. And it's always fun to find something that you're really good at and that you can really show off at, which was something that I completely could do. And so I just kept going. When I went to college, it was obvious that I was going to do range science, but I was really interested in the science end of it, the botany end of it. And so I double majored in botany. And I also worked in a genetics lab with plant genetics. And so I was kind of covering a broad range of bases, from being out on the land, watching the animals, watching the plants, and also being in the lab, seeing the genetics, counting the A's and C's and T's. And so I got a really broad sense of plants. The only thing I can't do is grow them. I watch them.
Yeah.
I am the world's worst gardener. I just watch to see what they're going to do. And so then when I finished my undergrad, I thought it would be really neat to keep going. And I had developed a second interest in the Czech language. So I went over to the Czech Republic and did a master's and ultimately a PhD program in botany over there, where I did some lab work and some field work. And so my PhD is in botany, but it's grounded in this range, uh, the grasses and the shrubs and things that are growing out here, all the things that I started learning in high school. And that, every time we would come out to the ranch, then I would watch and see and learn. One of the things that I was telling the kids not too long ago, we learned about winter fat, which is a really nice shrub that if it's mistreated at all, it tends to disappear. And we never saw it here. And I knew that this was really poor, really salty sea bottom soil. And so I just believed that, we just didn't have the soil to support winter fat. But we've got quite a lot of it now. So we put a lot of effort into making sure that we're taking care of the place. And it's always just wonderful anytime you see something like that, kind of a little pat on the back. You're getting it right. You figured it out. You're going in the right direction. And it's really neat to be able to walk around and point out winter fat to the kids and have them know what it is from here and not just see it somewhere else.
Cool. So I have some of your papers here, and none of them are any kind of order, so we might be kind of skipping around a lot. But I have this article, Betrayed by Nature. So it talks about APR and kind of what they're trying to do out here in these prairie lands, ecosystems. And one of the things you get into this article is just, this imperfection of humanity. It's supposedly, with the water sources that were created during, homesteading days up through to modern time by ranchers. What is APR? What do they look at? What is that imperfection? What, in your words, what do you think that imperfection that they're claiming is? And really, what is the impact of what humans have been on this here, as far as ranching goes over the last 130 years?
Well, I was teaching a college course for a while about this area, and I don't remember the name we used exactly anymore, but it was something about had to do something to do with nature. And at one point in one of our classes, we sat and talked about what nature was and what it meant. And what the students decided ultimately was that nature meant that there were no humans. For something to be natural or for a place to be, in tune with nature, that there had to be no humans. And when my students came across that, it really bothered one of them because one of our classmates, very talented, was original American. And so one of my students he got this horrified look on his face. And he said, well, you realize that what that means when people say that certain groups of people are, in tune with nature, that they're saying they aren't human. And I don't remember if he actually came out and said it or if he just left the implication there, because, and he was just, it was one of those aha moments when people realize something, and he was horrified, close to speechless by it. And it was definitely something that arose out of the class that I hadn't really been able to put in so many words before. So there is definitely this idea of nature with the capital N, and it has to exclude humans. And I just find that really, really scary, because my job out here, anytime I've been out here, has been to learn, to understand. It's a very humble approach. asking questions of something that is much larger and much more powerful than I am, and trying to find out the answers and trying to find out how to live within that in the best possible way. And that the whole nature with a capital N, the idea is that's not possible. You, as a human being, I am so imperfect that I can't learn anything. I just have to go away. The only thing I can do is go away. And and I guess, to me, I see the opposite thing, that we are a part of the planet. We are not aliens. We're not, and I want to be a part of that. I want to be a joyful part of that and do the very best I can to learn, to understand, to make things better. But if you subscribe to that, and as far as I can tell, that's kind of a core tenet of the APR, then the only thing you can do is go away. Anything you do will make things worse because it won't be natural. And you've got to turn your back and slap your hands over your ears and make sure that you're not, because if you see anything or learn anything, then you're going to want to take part and do something, and then you'll ruin it. And so that's really scary to me. And the other scary thing to me with the APR is that they don't have a feedback loop. If I mess up out here, I see it. When we do things right, we can count the number of extra days that the creeks run. And if we do things wrong, you can see, like when it was less healthy, when Mom was here, they would have these horrible flash floods, and we don't have those anymore. We get more water. It runs for longer, but it comes down slower. And the land is constantly telling us in those little ways, and big ways. If you make huge mistakes, then you're going to come out and you're going to see your cows dead, and it's going to be your fault because you messed it up, and that's your feedback. And whether you're a person who reacts to the feedback of, oh man, half my cows died, now I have no money and I can't buy my groceries. Or if you're the person that reacts to the feedback, half my cows died, I know them all, I screwed it up. Whatever the effect is, whatever effect is going to work on you. The point is that you've got something to say, you're messing up, you need to act differently. Whereas if you're subscribing to the nature with a capital N, you know that whatever happens is right because it's natural. And if half your bison die, that's good because it's natural. And as long as you didn't do anything. And the other problem is the idea that not doing anything, if you're not doing anything, you're doing something. And there's also that. Well, I didn't impact it because I didn't do anything. And that's the third problem with that point of view in my mind. Not doing anything, choosing not to do something, is an action. And it has impacts. It has serious impacts. But if you have no feedback loop, you don't have to care what those impacts are or if they're serious. You don't, if you drive species to extinction or whatever, if that's not affecting you, you may not even notice. I really saw that in the Czech Republic because I think everywhere has had this nature issue. And in the Czech Republic, they had these beautiful meadows that had these rare, wonderful orchids. And they were there because of centuries of people going out with their hand scythes and scything these for hay for their animals. And then, of course, under communism, everything was changed around. You didn't have the hand scything. You had everything mechanized, et cetera, et cetera. And you had all of this nature conservation. And so you had these wonderful meadows of orchids that were rare. So they had to be protected. The way to protect them is not to do anything with them, to get rid of all the people. So they removed all the people. But it's a small country. It's like a third the size of Montana. And there's 3 schools of botany, and they're kicking out, 5 or 6 botany PhDs a year, each of them. And and they have to have something to do. And so, I mean, it seems pretty obvious to us looking back that as soon as you kicked out the people, the meadows grew up with trees and the orchids all died and they were gone. But with that number of botanists per square feet, they figured it out right away. And they started to do something different because they didn't want all of their orchids, and they lost a lot of orchids, but they started trying different things, including getting a big bunch of students with nothing better to do and handing them a scythe and saying, go out and cut this meadow. And so today they still have orchids. And like I told them, when you look at the US, when it's so much bigger, it's so easy to just lose all your orchids and you never notice. If you don't have something to make you say, "Hey, what am I doing here?" You can miss it and not know that things are gone. It's easy not to notice.
So interesting enough, I did this film in Scotland, and it became this war over land use and land ownership. Reminiscent, maybe even echoing in this part of the world, similar themes. But there's a group of urban, I'll call them elite rewilders. Well, the terminology, let nature be free. No hand of man. That's what they're striving for. How does this, and of course the rewilding, I'm hearing the terminology from APR, they want to save the prairies. Who are they saving the prairies from, or why are they saving the prairies? And where, when it comes to this nature being free, is it nature going to be free with humans on the landscape? I mean, how does all that cotton out?
Well, and it is this idea, and I've seen this in lots of publications, that, oh, isn't it a miracle? This wonderful place has survived pristine and untouched with 100 years of ranching. And if it's ranched for one more week, it will be destroyed and gone forever, which is always a very frustrating idea for me. So obviously, as ranchers, we say, if we've kept it quite this wonderful for 100 years, trust us to just keep doing it. Maybe we can even do a little better. But yes, you repeatedly, you get this idea that it's so wonderful, it's so perfect, it hasn't changed, and it has to be preserved right away. And I, of course, I don't agree with that. Obviously, the rewilders, that's their idea, the no humanity. And to me, taking a longer viewpoint, I see this land as carefully and thoughtfully managed for what, 10,000 years by the original Americans, followed by, you know, maybe at least 100 years of pretty major chaos as they were largely destroyed by European diseases, and the Europeans came in and had no idea what they were doing, and then eventually crystallizing into the last roughly 100 years, at least in this area, where we smartened up enough that we were able to start to listen to the land, do what the land wanted, and start to return to that managed landscape where we were providing human beings with solar fuel. Harvesting the sunlight. I love the description of ranchers as used sunlight salesmen. I think that's wonderful. Yeah, we harvest the sunlight and pass it through the cows and turn it on to the people, and there's really nothing more healthy that you can eat.
That's great. Um, this whole idea, though, that conservation. We really push this. And Gifford Pinochet was the first person that really coined the word in the modern sense of it, is that it was a wise use of a natural resource. And I'll even say, historically, as humans, as a species, of course, we're made up of water, so we need to conserve water to survive. need to conserve food, right, to survive. And so wildlife conservation. And so we really push that. What does conservation mean to you out in this landscape? If you could paraphrase the question, what conservation means to me out here.
Conservation in that sense is creating an ecosystem that is going to keep running. And I'm not and not alone, it if it s- making sure it gets the inputs that it needs. If what it needs to keep functioning is somebody moving the big grazers, then somebody's got to be out there getting that done. But when a landscape is conserved, then the species that make it up are staying healthy, the water cycle's staying healthy, the energy cycle is staying healthy, and you've got a machine, you've got a perpetual motion machine that will go on and on. It won't be unchanging. Things will change, but it will continue to produce food, continue to uh, protect the water quality, continue to protect the air quality, and do all those things that we need a landscape to do.
So APR, I've heard, that they are buying up ranches and they're removing the historical water points, tanks, reservoirs that the cattle industry was created by, from basically the probably late 1800s, early 1900s. And that's allowed probably for greater disbursement of of animals over the landscape, both domestic and wild. What's going to happen if APR has their way to these lands, not only to the lands, but what's going to happen to the people and what's going to happen to the wildlife?
Um, well, as you've seen being out here, the water is absolutely critical. And we're just looking at one of the uh, reservoirs the other day, and it's really neat the way that these little reservoirs, when you put them in, it's just a hole in the ground and dirt. And in a few years, they pick up all of these wonderful water plants. And then they bring their insects, and then you've got the waterfowl, and naturally, all the big and small animals use it. I mean, I'm not a big fan of the people that switch entirely to some kind of water tank, because that's better for the cattle. It really is. It's cleaner water and easier for them to access. But then what are the frogs going to do, and the toads, and so on? And all of these reservoirs that we have out here are full of these rare amphibians, and it gives everything a home. All the plants, all the animals, and so, of course, when you destroy that, one, you're going to make those animals homeless again. But two, the thing that we've really, really seen on this place that's really come home to us is, with the improved rotation, where we're intentionally keeping our animals moving, and it has really improved the water cycle, which means that like I mentioned before, our streams hold water longer, better water, deeper, etc. We have much, much more water in the streams than was ever dreamed of by my grandparents and my great-grandparents. And so it's a double whammy, because for that to happen, this upland that you might think has nothing to do with water has to be healthy and has to be vegetated. And what we found from the past is, if the animals are rotated, then that happens and you get the better streams. And if the animals are not rotated, you lose that. And APR is hoping that the bison will rotate themselves. And historically, they have not. Historically, they have waited for, some Blackfeet or something to come along and rotate them the way we rotate our cows. And of course, they use different methods, but they got the same results. And I think that that's one of the reasons that when my great-grandparents came out here, this area had such unhealthy uplands. Was one, about 20 years before Lewis and Clark came through, there was a really, really bad smallpox epidemic in here before the Europeans got here, that came up from the trade routes from, down, they were getting trade goods out of Mexico and stuff, and they also got the smallpox that the Spaniards had brought down there. And so people have said, and I don't know if we know in this area, but it was like an 80-90% death rate, at least in other areas where people knew. And so what they lost, these people that, for thousands to tens of thousands of years had been carefully, intelligently managing the bison because that was their job. And because if they did it wrong, they were going to starve to death. So they had all kinds of incentive and plenty of time to learn to do it right. And when they lost 80 or 90% of their workforce and 80 or 90% of their knowledge base, because that was all that information, they didn't have any written language. It was all preserved in the minds of the people that were, running the managers. It was devastating. And as a result, when Lewis and Clark came through here, these uplands were in terrible shape. And I think, and I could be wrong because, it's just a result of a lot of research, and I wasn't here then. But I think the reason the uplands were in such bad shape was because the bison hadn't been managed for 20 years. It was just like if you had our cows out here that we've been moving around, and then you just suddenly picked us up and shipped us out and just left them here, and came back 20 years later and said, why are the uplands in such bad shape? And I think it was a similar kind of thing. Okay, so then Lewis and Clark came through. The Europeans all imagined that they were seeing the nature, exactly what had always been since time immemorial. And plus they didn't know how to treat it. So then they brought their animals in and behaved basically the same as the unmanaged bison. So by the time my great-grandparents came out here, one, these are terrible, salty sea bottom soils. And two, they'd been mistreated at that point for, good 50 years or more. And it was terrible. And as a result, there was no water to be had anywhere because the water regime was absolutely destroyed. And as we used our education, used what we knew about vegetation, started getting a decent rotation, started to get healthy water cycles. So now we have water in the creeks. So if you took out the reservoirs, at least you would have a place in the creeks for, at least your toads could mate and start their life cycle, even if there wasn't water the whole time, and you'd have a place to have your water vegetation and so on. But if you take out the reservoirs and then you abuse the uplands, then you will lose your creeks as well, and you'll end up with nothing. And I'm afraid that might be the outcome, since it was in the past.
Yeah. So what's the impact on wildlife? So maybe give me a little idea. What was it like for wildlife when Lewis and Clark came here? And then give me a little feedback on what's happened with the ranching. And then if you do away with the practices, the rotational grazing, the lack of water sources besides the rivers between the Milk River and the Missouri River, what's going to happen to wildlife?
Well, let's see. Lewis and Clark saw unimaginable numbers of bison, which my theory is because they were unmanaged and unharvested at that point, effectively. There was some deer and elk. I think the elk were so thin that they couldn't eat them a lot of the time, which I've never heard anybody complaining about now. It's also true that working the way they did need to eat fat animals, So those of us today are not quite. It's not quite such a necessity, so we might not notice if our elk were that skinny, but. So they did see some wildlife, almost no sage grouse. The sage grouse was almost a non-existent bird. It really came in the 30s, 40s kind of area time. That's when there were large numbers of those. But on the whole, I mean, everybody talks about the large numbers of deer. I'm thinking like the 60s. So on the whole, we generally have uh, really good wildlife when you compare with Lewis and Clark. Obviously, the sage grouse today are great compared to Lewis and Clark, and there's been periods when there were even more. Um, Deer and antelope, I would say probably comparable, but they've been better. And of course, the bison at the time, there were too many. I think there were too many. I think they were overpopulated, and I think as a result, they were not doing well. But that's my belief as a result of my research. So I would I would expect it to be bad for the wildlife. The wildlife from the sage grouse, from the insects on up, are dependent on the reservoirs. Reservoirs are really important for them. Um, and like I say, if you destroy the reservoirs and the water regime at the same time, destroy the small creeks, it'll compound. So I would expect it would be devastating for the wildlife personally. Um, but the thing about species are everything has something that's like. So there would be some species that would just think was the greatest thing that ever happened. But I would expect overall most species would be harmed.
So, what does APR mean to you? Give me some idea. And if you could paraphrase my question.
well, well, sometimes APR just means annual percentage return. I think that it really is a lot about selling a dream, and it's a very sellable dream, and it's made a lot of money for a lot of people, and so sometimes. At least for some people, I think that's all it is. It's finding a dream that you can sell and that will pay you dividends. Um, and it sometimes for me, APR is just really sad because it is to me just a dream, and it stands to destroy so much that is beautiful and important and valuable, from insects on up. And I hate to see it, organic matter in the soil. There's just so many things that stand to lose, and that part makes me sad. Um, it's very interesting because a lot of times when they talk about not wanting to displace us, and yet we're in the place. And so sometimes I wonder if some of them don't envision them sort of floating above us somewhere in the stratosphere, and taking up a completely different. Yeah, I mean, I don't think the ones that say they don't want to displace us are necessarily lying. I think they just can't understand any more than they can understand that 10,000 bison are going to have thousands of calves, extra calves that are going to have to, and how are they going to harvest those? Because it has to happen, or else you're going to start overgrazing, overpopulating. And there doesn't seem to be a plan for that. There doesn't seem to be a concept of that. And th- you run into a lot of things with that where there just is no concept of the idea that no, we really can't. If they are here, we can't be here. It is the end of our way of life. It is the end of our uh, family history, everything that we've worked for, and that actually does matter to us. And like I say, I think a lot of them just don't grasp that any more than they grasp that, all of those bison are going to reproduce and they're going to have to do something with that extra.
Yeah. We're losing light here. One last
Listen.
question. Community. What is your definition of community, and how does APR affect community in this part of the world?
Okay, so I'm a range scientist. So the first thing I think of when you say community is obviously a plant community. And I start looking around at the plants here and thinking about how many species I've got and what I think about the different ones. But human communities are a lot like that. And what what matters is diversity matters. And if you've got different people trying different things, you're going to have healthier communities, not just in town at the bank, but you're also going to have healthier plant communities, because that is the one thing that, like I said earlier, all different species like different things. And if you have 20 ranchers out here, every one of them that thinks that, boy, they know best, every one of them doing something different. Well, one of them's going to do the thing that the sharptail loves, and the other one's going to be doing the thing that's absolutely great for the lomatiums. And what you're going to end up with is everything. And if you replace them with one person with one idea doing one thing, then whatever it is that the thing that they're doing is good for, that will do fine. But you'll lose everything else. And so, yeah, it's a destruction of community, it's destruction of the ecological community and destruction of the human communities. And I hate to see that.
Thanks for listening. You can find this podcast wherever great podcasts live, including on the Shepherds of Wildlife Society website at shepherdsofwildlife.org. Please tell a friend, and let's save wildlife together.